This is Tracy Hales Vass with Right on Four Corners on KSJE 90.9 FM in Farmington, New Mexico. Today I'm talking with Jules Nyquist, award-winning poet from Placitas, New Mexico, talking today about her book, Zozobra Poems. Good morning, Jules.
Morning, Tracy. It's great to be here.
And you're talking to us from Placitas?
Yes, I'm calling in from Placitas, New Mexico, where we have Jules Poetry Playhouse.
Yes, we'll talk about that too. But right now I want to congratulate you on your award for the Zozobra poems.
Oh, thank you. It was a really fun book to put together.
It was really fun to read. I enjoyed it a lot. Zozobra is so much in New Mexico people's consciousness that it was good to have a book of poetry about him.
Yeah, and it has kind of a fun story behind it. It's a short book with just 12 poems, and I think most of your listeners know that Zozobra is that giant marionette, and they have the annual Santa Fe Festival where he kind of takes on the gloom and doom of everybody, and we burn him, and then he comes back the next year, and I thought of Zozobra. What if Zozobra goes on all these different adventures?
Right.
So the book is Zozobra traveling places, and kind of it actually won in the philosophy category for the New Mexico Arizona Book Awards.
And I think that fits.
So Zozobra kind of goes around and has this philosophy of life, and that's what the poems are about.
So I love that he's in the purple Minneapolis.
Right.
That was great.
The home of Prince.
Right.
I can read a poem if you like, or a couple of different poems.
Yes, I'd love that. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, since you mentioned the Minneapolis one, I can read the one called Zozobra Visits Minneapolis.
Yeah, do that.
Okay. Zozobra Visits Minneapolis. It was the day the city turned purple, and Zozobra got off the plane from Santa Fe. People stared at him, Midwesterners who had never seen a giant puppet. He barely fit in the plane or the taxi, and soon he spread himself out to relax on a park bench. Zozobra was amazed by all the green, the lakes in the middle of the city, skyscrapers and bridges lit up in purple. Children gathered at his feet, and he told them he was a man of gloom. Our prince died. That's why our city is purple, the children told him. He must have been a good man, said Zozobra. He heard tales from the children of Prince's talent as a musician, how he died for love and purple rain. Zozobra tells the children how he burns up every year, how he will carry their troubles away in fire and smoke. There's a big bonfire at the City of Faith, and for one night, music and dancing. I burn for the people, says Zozobra. Prince will live on for you, too.
I like that one very much.
Well, thanks. I'm originally from Minnesota, so I moved to New Mexico in 2011.
Oh.
And this book came about partly because I was in a writing group with 3 other women, and we called it Crosstown Poets because we were kind of scattered throughout the city of Albuquerque from different directions. And our friend Susan Paquette used to have a Zozobra party in her backyard in Corrales, and so the cover of the book is a puppet of Zozobra that was at her party. And unfortunately, Susan passed away in November of 2018 from cancer.
Sorry.
And part of her memory was just kind of, she had the best Zozobra parties at her house in Corrales. And so I thought about what would Zozobra do on some of these adventures. So that's why I wanted to dedicate this book to her, and that's kind of how it came about.
Were you surprised to find out about Zozobra when you moved to New Mexico?
A little bit. I think there's other kind of, like the winter solstice burnings and those kinds of things, but I did not know about Zozobra until I moved here and then started hearing about him,
And
around with
celebrating it.
Santa Fe. And yeah, I have never actually been up to Santa Fe to the Zozobra Festival, which it's on my list. I'm a little bit afraid of all the crowds.
Right, exactly.
That kind of thing. But yeah, so he's a character, and I think he has a lot of other good adventures. And I think it's something that Santa Fe and the Mexicans could be proud of.
Absolutely.
That we have him. Mm-hmm.
Do you want to read another one from the Zozobra poems?
Sure. This has always been a popular one called Not the Burning Man.
Yes.
If you know about the Burning Man Festival, that this is what that's about. Don't confuse the Zozobra with the Burning Man, that 40-foot-high effigy in the center of Black Rock City, where once a year mostly white men make their home on the Playa Seco for a week with weird art and explosives. No fireworks allowed now, nor pets. A simple pitch tent is outdone by air-conditioned yurts with king-sized beds. Billionaire techies with fluffy egos create their rabid libertarian fantasies, and Mark Zuckerberg helicopters in for a day to serve artisanal grilled cheese sandwiches. Zozobra can't even afford the price of admission if they would even let him in on this dry alkali flat of a volcanic lake bed. He is the lowercase of burners and not the 1%. Zozobra has his own following in Santa Fe, a pagan city of holy faith. He's an idol with a crowd of 60,000 in one day, same size as Burning Man, but Zozobra clears the air of gloom. The people's paper pain burns in the marionette of a man, and the next morning they are lighter, happier, ready for the day.
So there's 12 poems in here. How long did it take you to write all of these?
Well, with these, I've started writing a couple more about Zozobra, and then I was inspired. It was probably maybe over about 6 months. They came pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I had the character, it was a little bit easier to write about because you have that character in your mind and what would he do with this situation.
Right.
And then as I was going about doing different things, everything from shopping at Target or going to a bar or, seeing a movie, there's what would Zozobra do kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is fun. Now, there's one thing that just amazes me about poets. As a fiction writer, I know that I have to write, I have to revise, I think about it, and it's not just like throwing words down on the page. Poetry seems to flow so naturally. Do you have to revise and plan, etc.?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I think I don't think it's that much different than fiction in some of the process. Poets have, of course, you're always concerned about the language and the words, and it's that condensed part of it and how does it sound. My poetry is very narrative, usually, but that usually tells a story in some way as well. There may or not be a character. And it's kind of like a puzzle to me sometimes. There's, where you think of just, you have it in stanzas, and I sometimes write a lot before I really know where the poem is going to start. So I usually write longhand with some observations, and then I want to put this thing in here and this description and try to play with all my senses and how is that coming together.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. Homesick, then, is also an award winner in a previous year, and that's quite a different book.
Yes, it is. Yeah, that is a full-length poetry collection. that was jointly produced by Beatlick Press and Jules Poetry Playhouse Publications. We also have Poetry Playhouse Publications as our own press, and that we help other poets as well. We can move on to Homesick then.
Sure.
Which is more of a poetic memoir, and it's kind of the life and death of my parents from my daughter's perspective, and also about my grandmother, and also about growing up in the Midwest. I grew up in Minnesota, and coming to New Mexico, and it's also the death of my parents. My dad died here in Albuquerque when he came to live with me for a while. My mom passed away before him. So there's all these things. Some of the poems I had started just doing some family history research, and I have some Swedish ancestors, but then when both my parents unfortunately passed away in 2014, my mom first and then my dad about 6 weeks later, it really, or 6 months later, I should say, and he was with me for 6 weeks in Albuquerque. After that, I was writing and putting this poetry collection together.
It's pretty tear-jerking.
So, yeah. And it touches on issues such as caretaking parents. I'm sure a lot of us have, how do you juggle working and taking care of parents, and one thing is familiar and then things change, and dealing with all of that. And then, so I'm hoping it will speak to others in that area, and grief and dealing with your parents. And then also there's a whole other area with my grandmother who died of domestic violence in the 30s. Oh. And so I have a few poems in there about that and the history of that and dealing with domestic violence.
So a lot of issues that should go into Zozobra's burning.
Yeah, they're a little bit connected in a way. So.
I think one of the trio that you started with is someone very familiar with us, and that's Andy Penner. Yes.
Andy was part of our writing group for Crosstown Poets.
I saw that photo. She was a colleague of mine here at the college.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes. So
yeah, Andy's great too.
She is, yes. Now, you've been talking about Jules' Poetry Playhouse. Tell me a little bit about that.
So the Poetry Playhouse is, right now we're in Placitas, New Mexico, and if you want to check it out, our website is poetryplayhouse.com. It started out in Albuquerque in 2012, and we had some various locations, and now we have more of a retreat-type setting where we have a casita that we use for writing events and classes. We have classes that I teach and that my husband John Roach teaches, but we also bring in a lot of visiting poets. So we have like a lot of Santa Fe poets and Albuquerque poets coming in to teach classes. And it's a small space, so we have, generally about 12 people.
Perfect small
at
group.
A time.
Yeah.
Which makes for a very intimate setting. And so we, usually about once a month we have, classes coming up March, April, May onward. So you can check our website for that. But my whole concept of this was play and creativity. And I think sometimes writing can get to be very academic.
Yes.
Or competitive. And I have an MFA, so I kind of know, where that comes from. So I really wanted to make it accessible for more experimenting and for all ages, for whether it's youth or adults, or to just have that sense of play and safety that you can experiment. Because I think that's where good writing comes from.
I do too. I noticed that it talks in the book about
Mm-hmm.
a selection of these poems were performed with music and movement.
Oh, are you talking about the Homesick book?
No, I think that's in the, I keep
Or the
switching
Zozobra book?
at the beginning of the
Yeah,
Zozobra book. So I was
yeah,
curious about that.
yeah. And I perform poems. I would not consider myself a slam poet. I am not a slam poet.
Okay.
But we had with the Zozobra, we had a performance called Our Familiar Dead. It was an improv performance at Tortuga Gallery in Albuquerque back in November 2018, and we had a dancer there, we had some musicians there, and we had several poets there, and we were reading our work, and there was dance and music. I've performed with music backing me up. I think poetry is a very oral art form,
Yes.
which is where it started out orally.
Mm-hmm.
So I consider myself a page poet, but also that poetry is meant to be read.
Right.
And I think by reading it, you can also help edit your own work. How does it sound in your mouth? And the breath and the line, that's all part of poetry.
It is. So much more than fiction. It involves the poem on the page with the spacing and everything. And the imagery.
Right.
All very
The
important.
imagery, and it's part of the body.
Right.
And part of that, how does it sound and how does it make you feel? And part of that play is you don't always have to understand everything about the poem. And, when I write something, I'm hoping it gets out there to reach people. I never expect, they're never going to have exactly what I have with my experience, but if some of that gets across, or how does it give them an idea, or does it make them feel a certain way, or does that inspire them to write something?
So does some of that go on in the poetry workshops?
Yes, a lot of that. We touch on that. For example, we've got Debbie Brody from Santa Fe coming up down here, on like extended metaphor and political poetry. So I kind of think all poetry is a little bit political anyways, but political in the fact that what are your values, what are your beliefs with there, what's your cultural views. We also do some forms. I've taught a Sestina class for a long time that I'll probably be offering again more in fall. We've got Donald Levering from Santa Fe here in May 30th, doing a Pumping Up the Pantoon class. So form is also a really good way to experiment, and it's like a scaffold that it gives you some structure that you can hang the words on to help you come up with some different views or different situations, word combinations. It's very much about lines and words with poetry.
Yes, that's well said. I was going to ask you, you said you also at Poetry Playhouse publish some works?
Yes. So we've got a few authors that we've published. We're still very small, kind of kitchen table type of press. So it's pretty limited. But Megan Baldridge, who was on your show,
Yes.
Her books are with us for Jules Poetry Playhouse, and she has a lot of poems like about knitting, which is really fun.
It is.
Or about the unprecedented
Yes.
poems, and then the Sadro poems with their dog. So, I mean, it's a lot of writing about everyday types of things. We also have Eleanor Stewart, who wrote like a poetic memoir called She Tells Us Stories. And then also Albuquerque poet Rich Boucher with All of This Candy Belongs to Me, which is another great volume of poetry. And we'll be having some other ones out soon. But we've had a lot of finalists and award-winning books.
Yes.
And I've also published a couple of Minnesota poets, Kevin Zepper and Aaron Lynn Marsh. So as they travel through here, it's really nice to have them, and usually poets that I really like their work. I've listened to them or heard them, and encourage them to get their books out so we can have something on the page besides their performances. So sharing it out with the world.
Well, that's great. So you focus
Yeah.
totally on poets and poetry.
Right. All poetry.
I think that's good because often it can
Yeah.
be, especially in the past, I think it's stronger now, but poetry was often overlooked.
Well, I know when I was in school, they never really had poets in the schools, and they
Right.
had a lot of, dead white men poets reading,
Exactly.
that I saw in books, and some of them resonated, but a lot of them didn't.
Right.
And I think a lot of us can remember a writing teacher that encouraged us when we were in school, or saw a poet. I mean, I didn't really know any poets personally until much later after high school. So I think it's great with our, poet laureates, and now
Right.
our New Mexico State Poet Laureate, Levi Romero. I mean, I think
Yes.
it's wonderful what's going on in New Mexico right now. We have such a rich poetry community here.
It's really true. So, were you always writing poetry, or when did you discover poetry in your life?
Probably like in junior high. I was always journaling or reading. I was at the library a lot. I think libraries are great to just experiment and see what you like. And I started writing poems in like junior high kind of age, 13, 14, 15, and then kind of just always went from there. I just kept writing.
Just kept it
It's
up.
something I would do whether it got published or not.
Right.
It's just something that's very fulfilling for me when you have a poem and it works, or that it kind of comes together like that.
And you know it, like you say, a puzzle coming together. So do you write every day?
No, not every day.
Okay, good.
But I try to write. I try to journal almost every day, at least to or put thoughts down. But I think we're always observing, even if you're not writing. It's just, I guess, that way of looking at the world.
Right.
I tend to write a lot in the mornings just because you kind of come out of that dream state, and that's where I'm a lot more open to seeing things. But it could be any time. If something just kind of quirky out there hits me, it's like, oh, that would make a cool poem, and I might make some notes about it. I might write a poem on the spot, but usually it's more of taking notes of one incident and then you're working on it a lot in your head,
right?
Even if you're not actually writing. Fiction's a lot like that too. Yeah,
it is. And sometimes when you get to the page, it's not there anymore.
Right. That's why I say always have some paper,
right,
or your phone notes, or whatever you do to write it down, because it could vanish. And I'm always either writing down a phrase or something.
So do you want to read another poem for us?
Sure. Do you want something from Zozobra or from Homesick?
Your choice.
Okay. Well, I'll let people discover Homesick then on their own, and I'll stick with Zozobra since
Sounds
that's
good.
the latest one.
Great.
This one is at the end of the book, called Zozobra and the End of the World.
Oh, good one.
Which I kind of think is timely.
I do too.
Zozobra is not afraid when the world blows up and the end is near. He will be on the island of Ibiza. The trade winds keep it clear from nuclear fallout. It is a place to be for a party. When his friends leave the planet, Zozobra remembers he can't take his gloom with him. He can only leave behind stories and a few bags of shredded paper. Zozobra has a drink at Hotel Andaluz in Ibiza, the second-floor bar. The party music is played by young DJs. The wall of water soothes his eyes, and he stays away from the fire under glass. I actually was taking notes in the hotel, Hotel Andaluz in Albuquerque downtown, when they have that Ibiza bar.
Right.
So check it out.
Absolutely. And where can our listeners find your books?
They're on Amazon. If you just Google my name, Jules, Jules Nyquist, Nyquist, you'll see I have an Amazon author page, so you should see all of them come up. And then poetryplayhouse.com is our website for all the classes. If you click on the calendar, classes and events. We also have like a monthly reading series in Bernalillo, the last Tuesday of every month at Cactus Brewing.
Well, very good. Well, I've certainly enjoyed reading your poems and talking with you about them.
Oh, it's been fun, Tracy. So thank you so much for letting me be on the air.
Yes.
It's been great.
And that was Jules Nyquist talking about her award-winning book, Zozobra Poems, her book Homesick Then, and Jules' Poetry Playhouse. This is Tracy Hales-Vass with a Right on Four Corners on KSJE 90.9 FM in Farmington, New Mexico.